Alize Armstead, and I'll be presenting my project on educational dignity for justice-involved youth in North Carolina. And my collaborator for this was Disability Rights North Carolina. I do work there as well, and I spoke to Corey, who's our supervisor for our policy team, Glennis, who's our attorney on our educational team, as well as Elijah, who's an attorney on our educational team. So I chose to collaborate with disability rights not only because I work there, because I see every day the gaps and barriers that young people with disabilities are facing across North Carolina. And Disability Rights North Carolina mission is to defend the rights and dignity of people with disabilities. And also, it aligns closely with my values and goals, as well as the values and goals in this course. So my project focused on the educational gaps that are happening with inside of juvenile detention centers, and those are called JDCs, as well as youth detention centers. Those are YDCs, and how the young people there are not receiving the legal required instruction that they're entitled to through the IDEA. And also, the special education rights are often ignored, and how the systems designs to protect those rights are breaking down, once a child enters the facility. And there is a major disconnect between what the law says and how they're implementing it. So, my first conversation with Corey, she is the one who pushed me to go ahead and do it. Juvenile detention centers and looking at the educational process with them because she explained how there is no clear accountability between the Department of Public Instruction as well as Department of Juvenile Justice, and how this lacks means that youth can go days, weeks, or even months without receiving instruction. And this is usually due to staffing shortages, no oversight on the Division of just Juvenile Justice and this is making the problem worse. And through our conversation, Corey, she encouraged me to go ahead and investigate further and talk with Glennis. So as stated before, Glennis is she's an attorney on our educational team. And my conversation with Glennis, it really focused on the day-to-day realities of monitoring these facilities. Due to us being a PNA, which is a protection and advocacy center with the state, we have authority and jurisdiction to go into certain juvenile detention centers as well as youth detention centers to make sure that they're providing the proper educational needs as well as treating the children right who are there. And she also explained how, oftentimes youth they lose their educational identity the moment they enter the detention center because, and this is usually because like their records, when requesting records, if they're in a juvenile detention center, they're only there for a short period of time, and either they're going to be released soon or they're going to be disposed to another location. So they may be just adjudicated youth who are waiting to meet a certain age to go ahead and move to like a adult correction facility. And also her saying like that their school records, their IEPs, which is an individualized educational program, and their educational plans, they're not being followed, and it's hard to track it just based on when they are requesting the records. Maybe they're not coming by the time the youth is there when they leave. And due to this, they're using this kind of as a justification of why the students aren't receiving the type of care that, instructions that they're supposed to be receiving. And her perspective just really highlighted how disability rights intersect with juvenile detention in a very real human ways, because we have to talk to these youth to know what's the problem is going on. And a lot of times youth will tell us, I've been on a few monitoring trips to juvenile detention centers as well as YDCs. And a lot of times the youth will be like, if they miss school, they just miss it and keep going. It's not like a makeup day. Sometimes they're not able to go due to weather inclements, teachers not being there to teach them, as well as just not getting the proper instruction that they need. So my third conversation is with Elijah, and he's also an educational attorney. He just went through a settlement with the Department of Public Instruction as well as the Department of Juvenile Justice because we were trying to figure out the oversight. Because even though the Department of Juvenile Justice is in control or oversees all the YDCs, JDCs. It's really the Department of Instruction who is supposed to be making sure that they're following the educational plans that the students are having to have. But since there is no oversight, that's where this gap is happening, and we're seeing students not getting the education that they need, not attending classes as they're supposed to, and just slipping through the cracks. And these students have expressed how they feel undeserving. A lot of times they say, well, I'm in prison. Well, they'll be like, I'm in jail, so like this is what it's supposed to be like. And a lot of times the experiences that they're going through, they're feeling like, oh, this is just all a part of me being inside of the detention center. And that's not the case. Some students there do feel like they want to be able to finish high school or get their finish high school, get their diplomas while they're there. But because they don't have track of like what their adequate grade levels are, their scores or their grades, it's hard to kind of give them the instruction that they need because they don't know what grade level to place them in. And Elijah, with talking to him, he, offered a legal perspective and explained the history behind the DIP, which is the Department of Instruction, as well as the DJJ, Department of Juvenile Justice Settlement. He broke down the differences between the responsibilities that the law are giving, whereas, the responsibilities of how it's supposed to be practiced. And he also emphasized that youth with disabilities, often do not receive their individual education plans or any services at all. And he says that sometimes that really shaped how they felt about themselves and as well as their educational continuance. So during my final conversation, I brought it right back to Corey since she is who I started with and who's pushed me to talk about this issue that's happening. And, we just discussed a key ideal that systems reflect our beliefs in human nature. And that's what I had shared with her from Carlberg. And it's just, sharing how the ideal of moving beyond adversarial politics and towards collaborative situations. A lot of times, these I won't even say a lot of times, but sometimes the staffing in these facilities can have already perceived who these children are based on one, looking at their record on while they're in there and just looking at their record in general, and then just having the knowledge of this is a child who is now in a juvenile detention center and just label them as bad or that they need to be put up or separated and they don't deserve the same accesses that children, who are not in those facilities do. And then we also and she was telling me how if we reviewed detained youth and understood it as a problem with then the system will operate in punitive ways, and that's kind of how they're doing now because they're not giving them that chance to be rehabilitated, which is the goal of the juvenile detention centers. Corey agreed that, punitive assumptions undermine the education as well as how real reform requires both structural changes like better oversight, staffing, and instructional hours, and a cultural shift towards the rehabilitation and dignity that these children there still have. And this is what DRC does so well by blending the law enforcement with dignity center advocacy. Because even though a lot of times, even though we will say, a client of ours, they need this service or we feel like they need or really be beneficial to it, we still have to ask them, do you want this service? Is this something that you want to do? And if they say no, then we have to, agree and be like, okay, this is not what you want to do. That's their choice. So it's not like we just go ahead and do all of these pieces and back road work without their knowledge. We want to get their consent first to make sure this is something that they want, because if they don't, it's not going to be beneficial to help to give them this if that's not what they were looking for. What I learned about this topic is that North Carolina actually has strong laws. They do have good laws on paper and it does look good, but the implementation of it is inconsistent. One, throughout all YDCs, JDCs, there are a few that are, I would say, the ideal of what it should look like, but there are some that just aren't meeting the marks at all. And due to this disconnect between the Department of Instruction as well as Department of Juvenile Justice, it impacts daily instructions. Education is being deprioritized with the youth that are detained, and special education rights are, routinely violated because they're not being able to get the services that they are legally supposed to have. These systems failures, eventually becomes internalized by them youth themselves and shaping their views of not only the education, but their self-worth, and centralizing these issues are undermining the legal frameworks that are supposed to protect them. These are just a few of the resources that I have brought towards each of the individuals that I spoke throughout this process. We had explored Carver, and I shared the ideal of moving beyond adversarial politics and towards collaborative solutions. We discussed constructive resistance, and that's what. And when we discussed this, we talked about more of trying like to change it, but not do additional harm and trauma. That's what we don't want to give the
Mm-hmm.
youth. We want
Mm-hmm.
to change it, but we don't want to change it into a way where once we finally get where we want, kids who had to go through the change with us are traumatized, and it's just more on them. We also talked about the ideal of coherence between the material and spiritual. And that's how we're getting like the material of them supposed to get the education that they need, but spiritually, how they're feeling when they don't get it and how they feel about themselves. And then we also talked about the quality education in strong, equitable institutions. And together, all these concepts help frame DRNC's work. I feel like DRNC was already doing it, but they just didn't have the empirical evidence to back it up, to show like, oh, this is other people who did it. They probably have their laws and all that, but I feel like they didn't have this piece. So that's why I really wanted to bring it with them because I feel like we work hand in hand this class in DRNC. So, this project helped me understand that social change requires more than shifting policies. I see that because even though the policies are there, it's not being implemented. And without that piece, the policy just is just writing on paper, and how it
Mm-hmm.
requires
Mm-hmm.
shifting your values. System must be built on dignity, rehabilitation, and belonging. Laws do not matter without cultural alignment. And I feel like DRNC itself does try to place this into all aspects of life for individuals with disabilities. Personally, this project allowed me to see juvenile education through several lenses, legally, policy, human rights, and lived experiences. I gained a deeper understanding of the system failures that are happening and the harm that adjudicated youth are facing. And I also felt inspired to, advocate with both compassion and skill. I needed, even though I'm very compassionate, I still need to have stuff to back me up with it. And I feel like this experience just strengthened my commitment in pursuing justice that honors dignity. Some of the implications we talked about was just independent oversight. So maybe a third party other than juvenile, DJJ and DPI, maybe a third party watching them because they're supposed to be watching each other, but we see it how children are slipping through. So a third party would probably be beneficial. Mandatory instruction hours, um, immediate enrollment processes, culture shifting in facilities, and just long-term goals of like educational dignity. And then overall collaborating with DRNC just grounded my learning. And I feel like it really just put what we learned in class in perspective, seeing it really helped me both with the material as well as the spiritual reform. I see that DRC kind of does both. They try to give people who are in these positions that are like in hard times when they contact us, we try to give them the material. So also, giving them resources, helping connect them to people, representing them if need be, but also spiritually, because we see how they kind of come in with us, all gloomy and sad because of what they're going through. But after, we help them out, they feel better about themselves. They feel like they got resources and now they feel like one, their voice is heard. I really honestly what I think the biggest problem is nobody wants to say we messed up and we're not
Mm-hmm.
doing how we're supposed to because the Department of Juvenile Justice, you're supposed to oversee all of this. So when it's not happening, y'all should step in, and fix it, and just be like, you know what, we are messing up, especially because there are some JDCs that are, meeting the standards. And then with the Department of Instruction, they're supposed to be monitoring that and making sure that they're getting the education, but they're not doing that. And I'm not sure what happened, if a ball slipped or people are not checking boxes that's supposed to be checked. But I feel because we already had the laws there, so I feel like no one's is implementing it, but no one's also taking accountability for saying, "Oh yeah, we're not doing what we're
Hmm.
supposed to do."
Hmm. I see that there's a Department of Instruction, and
Hmm.
I also see from your work that they're kind of painted on the wall. Like they don't, like people ignore them. Like they don't, like it's like these youth get instruction only when their security is taken care of. We're the priority is to make sure that they're secure and they're in a like their basic needs are taken care of, their rights are like, and then if we have time, we'll give them some education. And normally we don't have time, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh well, yeah, if we'll get there. And clearly, somebody down the line is not understanding that if these youth don't receive education, they're going to perpetuate,
Hmm.
right? Like there's a major misunderstanding there that security is more important than instruction. And it's that like I think what you pointed out is this is a cultural issue that laws we have a nice law there, but culturally we don't prioritize educating people that are incarcerated because it's like we decide that they don't deserve it or something, right?
Hmm. Yes, I would say that is a big thing because just from my monitoring visits, some students was like, I haven't been to school since I've been here, and they've been there like 2 months. So that's two
Ah,
months that you're not getting any instruction. They don't know what what grade level they're on or what they're not. Or sometimes they are taking the courses, but they don't know if they got the credits. So a lot of times, like they have been taking courses, but no one's keeping track of the credits that they're earning.
yeah.
So when they are, either back in their home or if they're moving to another facility, there's no record of that. So they're either having to redo the process again, and a lot of times youth are just like, it is what it is. Like, or some of them even feel like, and this is the sad reality of the youth being in detention center is a lot of times a lot of things that they're going through, they just internalize it as this is what happens when I end up here. And then a lot of them are like, I don't need this. I'm ready to go to adult corrections anyway. And it's like, even though you feel that way, you do need this because when you get out, of adult corrections, then what are you going to do?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
and because you don't have that education,
Yeah. Then what?
it's hard because you don't even have a high school degree.
I,
And some of them really, really want to get an education, but there's no one there that they can go to get that.
I have a kind of a follow-up comment really quickly. What your project brings to mind this principle of universal participation for me,
Mhm.
because basically what you're showing us is that there are certain members of our society that our culture doesn't value. We're not interested in hearing their voice. We don't think they're ever going to contribute to society, and so we have no reason to educate them. They're just like, let's put them away somewhere else and hopefully, we just forget about them. And I think this is yeah, I mean, you know exactly what I think about that.
Yeah, I do think it's very sad because, they just they just move through life with like
Yeah,
that, you know?
yeah.
I would say, from my conversation with Elijah, one of the ways that they're trying to figure out is oversight. The question you brought up about like how can parents, help, we've seen that it's hard because, even talking with Corey, who is our policy team, our supervisor on the policy team, she said that it's hard because she doesn't know how she can help, how parents can help, because it's kind of not like a fact sheet on what to do, when your child is in the does get into the legal system. It's not like a fact sheet or this is who you call, and a lot of times it's a lot going on in these places. I'll just One example is like they're supposed to get a phone call every day. They're supposed to get a phone call, but a lot of times they're being told to do calls on times that like they know their parents won't answer because they're at work. So it's like, how can I, speak to my parent about what's going on here if I can't even get in contact with them? Like, you won't let me call her just like one child I know, they feel like I gotta call my mom like around 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. That's when she go on break. But they want them to call her like 9, 8 o'clock in the morning. That's when she's going to work. So it's hard to speak with these kids. And then a lot of times they're being moved from like, let's just say they start off in Durham, they live in Durham. Well, they may be moved all the way to Alexander or Rockingham. And then like the parent, it's hard to get all the way, from Durham to Alexander or Rockingham or just these remote, because a lot of times they're in like remote backwoods kind of spots. It's some up there in Butner, like it's a one up there in Butner. It's in so remote. I went out there, I'm like, I feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere right now. But and then like, the parents not having maybe transportation, daycare. So it's a lot. So it's kind of hard on the parent too to know like you assume that your child's being taken care of because you're like they're with, the state you want to say. But then when you can't contact them, you can't have calls. If the child gets in trouble, they start taking away those privileges. So it just makes it harder and harder for the parents. So right now, I would say I don't know of any other organizations helping other than my organization, Disability Rights. And I just know that we're helping because we have that we're a PNA, so we have the jurisdiction to go in. And due to them being youth, they are a protective class, so it can be hard to get other people involved because you got to do all the background checks and just all of that would entail with it. So I will say that we are looking into more ways of letting parents know their rights for their child while they're in there. Also, things that parents can do while their child is in there, to make sure your child is getting what they need. And yes, I would say we try to monitor every JDC in the state of North Carolina. We try to monitor them all.
Okay, thank you so much. Congratulations. Really cool.